story of Rajputs in medieval India occupies a large space. Unfortunately, a lot of these accounts are about myths and legends which have very little historical bearing. But these have to be taken into account because a large debate has also concentrated round the origin of the Rajputs and their particular role in resisting the Delhi Sultans and the Muslim rulers of the period. Now, I will begin first with their origin myth, which is known as the Agnikula myth. It is said that the Brahmins in this period, that is around 10th century, realized that the social structure was breaking down, which depended very much on the four castes carrying on their activities. Now, there was a gap, and in that gap of the warrior caste, that is where the Rajputs were inducted in. The story goes that the Brahmins started a fire on the top of Mount Abu, and out of the sacrificial fire, about 4 armed men just jumped out, and they were the actual originators of the 4 Rajput clans. Now, this Agnikula myth has been quoted over and over again in historical debates, but it has remained, according to some historians, a story of legitimization. The caste system in which the Rajputs were included were definitely different from the other castes in that period. What we find is that it was caught up very much within their clan system. The clan system was again divided according to the territorial units of the villages. This was also divided by the numerical rate of 12. So sometimes the smallest unit of the Rajputs would be composed of 48 villages, and the largest unit would be 84 and above. Now, this entire area was divided between the Rajputs and the non-Rajputs. So what happened was that caste and clan came together, but it communally then divided the Rajputs from other people of that area. The 2 factors which had become most important in keeping the Rajputs together were supposed to be their common origin. All the Rajputs claimed descent from either a solar or a lunar power or dynasty of the epic period. There were the foreigners, the Hunas, who lived in this area, who were incorporated into the Rajput clans, and initially they used to be known as the Gurjaras, the Gurjara Pratiharas or the Huna Gurjaras. But actually, after a while, they came to be known only by one name, and that was the Pratiharas. But apart from the Huns, there were also the tribal people, the Bhils, the Medas, who were also incorporated into this clan. Now, this entire legitimizing principle occurred according to the logic and the demands of the Brahmins. So the caste system played a very important part in this. And that is why later historians have started debating the actual authenticity, not only the authenticity, but also the importance of trying to read these myths. Now, it was in the ruins of the Gurjara Pratihara Empire that the Rajput states came into existence. The 3 most important were the Gaharwars, the Paramaras, and the Chauhans. The Chauhans were from Ajmer. There was not necessarily a common enemy which they were fighting. Often they were fighting among themselves. But one of the most important wars which the Chauhans in the later period fought was that with the Muslim sultans who were coming in. The 2 battles of Tarai by Prithviraj Chauhan, in the first battle of Tarai, he defeated the Muslims, and in the second battle of Tarai, he was unfortunately defeated himself and became a vassal of the Muslim sultans. We must remember that this was not a straight fight between the Hindus and the Muslims, as has been construed by some historians. It was in the later period, when the sultans came into power, that we find that some of the Rajput states were marked out as the areas where the conflict was concentrated. One of this in the 15th century was Mewar. Earlier, you see, there was the first dynasty, which were known as the Guhils. They were becoming very important in the area by conquering the other states. But then they came into conflict with the sultans, and Alauddin Khilji occupied Chittor, and the Guhilers lost to him. After that, the Sasodias came into power, and among these Sisodia rulers, there was the man who was also very well known was Rana Kumbho. But his war was mainly against that of Malwa and the surrounding territories. Now, during this period, we find that there was a definite cultural exchange between this entire area. During the period of Rana Kumbho, an attempt was also made to bring about the solidarity of the Rajputs. But unfortunately, this could not be achieved. And later, after him, that is his grandson, Rana Sanga, also tried to bring about a confederacy of the Rajputs to fight the Lodhis. And it was thus that he invited Babur to come and help him. But what resulted was that Babur not only defeated the sultans, but also started a war against the Rajputs, and ultimately he was able to conquer them. With the military achievements of the Rajputs coming to a particular point, we find how the warrior caste was actually defining itself. Now, if you take Prithviraj Chauhan, then we find that he was leading an army of 300,000, which included the cavalry and about 300 elephants. Now, all this was, in terms of force, built mainly with Rajput armed men, and also they had some of the non-Rajput men who were of the lower caste. Now, from the beginning, no such feeling existed between the enemies and the other powers who were fighting with him or without him. So what we find is that the Rajputs formed a kind of a unit of their own, and later, often, there was interpersonal struggle between these various units. So the fight was going on not only between Rajputs and non-Rajputs, but it was also going on between the Rajputs themselves through the different clans. After Prithviraj Chauhan was defeated and the Chauhans were moved from Ranthambore, they came to settle in Ajmer. Ranthambore was also occupied by Alauddin Khilji. So by the 15th century, when the Rajputs had almost distributed into various small units, and the Delhi Sultans had established their power not only in North India, but also other parts of the country, and they were steadily moving in to Rajasthan, we find Mewar was one of the states which was coming into prominence. And even while Rana Sanga, in trying to defeat Lodhis, were inviting Babur and trying to get all the Rajputs together, what happened was very clearly that he was himself not able to hold either his military power or his territories in good order. And Finally, when Babur came in, the wars that started brought in a decline of the military achievements of the Mewar. Now, during this period, what we have to notice is that even in Mewar, certain military technology was being developed, which they had also acquired from the sultans. Apart from that, they were using other kinds of devices to build their forts, which were becoming very, very powerful and impregnable. The third factor is also that the Rajputs, in spite of everything, were being brought under a common religious fervor, that was the Bhakti movement. The story of Mirabai of Mewar, who was one of the greatest women Bhaktins of our period, actually created that aura of religious fervor which brought in chivalry, honor, everything under one banner. And the Rajputs, who were actually considered to be the protectors of the Hindu religion and protectors of women, and the concept of chivalry was actually took its height in this period. But this was expressed more through literature of the kind that was written by Chand Bardai to right up to the Sufi poets like Malik Muhammad Jaisi. It was also found in the songs and music which filtrated down to the common people. Overall, there was this story of give and take between the ruling class and the common people. How much of that was actually a reality, we do not know, but the Bhakti movement and the Meera legend definitely gives us a new insight into Rajput history which needs to be explored. The other thing is that the myth that not only the Rajputs but all the Hindu rulers had actually together resisted the Muslims right from the 12th century to the 15th century was completely made clear that this was not so. That the Hindus or the Rajputs fought among themselves just as much as they made alliances with the other Muslim powers in this area at that time, that is Gujarat and that is parts of the Deccan. So what we have to keep in mind is that while a feeling of consolidation and an identity was also coming into force, that is, the Rajputs were thinking of themselves as Rajputs, they were also thinking of themselves as members of a ruling class who, in order to remain in government, must ally with any of the ruling class who would help them. And this is where you see the concepts of feudalism actually was at play in a way which alienated them from their own community and led to the collapse of the Rajput power, finally with the coming of the Mughals. The Rajput rulers were also patrons of great art and architectural activity. And Rana Kumbhu had a huge tower built in order to commemorate his victories. It still stands in Rajasthan. Now, around this, that is, around the temples and around the palaces and minars, we now find a definite inflorescence of art and architectural activity which is connected with the Rajputs. It began with Khajuraho, where the Chandelos of Khajuraho built a very important complex of temples. The Khandari of Mahadev, the Kailashnath temple, the later additions all followed that of the Nagaru school. That is a long shikhara, or the horizontal lined the head of the temple, along with a kind of development like smaller structures of the Bhogamandapas and the Nat Mandapas. It sort of formed into a big cluster of architectural formation which was never boring, and it was broken in terms of space and its ornamentation. So the Rajasthani architecture took off from the North Indian architecture, and from the 12th, 13th century in and around Rajasthan developed certain regional characteristics which still stands today and stands as testimony to the art-loving public that actually were its patrons. What was happening was quite clear that during the period of Alauddin Khilji, who invaded Chittor and defeated the rulers and occupied it for a while, it was then once again given back to another of the dynasties, and the rules were continuing. What we have to remember about the state formation of the Rajputs is that they were based totally on clan loyalty. And each of the clans were, related. Even the lowest subject was related to the king through kinship and ties of blood. This actually built what was the cementing factor in their relations with each other, and this was known as Rajput loyalty. Much has been written by historians and social anthropologists on what they considered to be the particular characteristics or moral ethics that were there in the case of the Rajputs when they formulated their relationship with each other. One of this was known as Bhai Bant, which is the tie that I will serve you till the last, and that is because they considered the Rana or the leader to be also their kin. Now, one of the important things that we have to remember is that based on this, D.D. Kosambi formulated a very interesting theory of feudalism, which is feudalism from above and feudalism from below. He stated that initially, when the Rajput states were being formed, they were being looked at from the point of view of the ruling class. That is from the top, and this was like a kind of a triangle. And the ruler, as in feudal Europe, was to be the head of the feudal system, while the peasantry were to be at the bottom, and the feudatories were to be the other arm, who were actually going to take the revenue. But what happened later on, particularly in the case of the Rajputs, we saw that there was a division within the subject population themselves. One set were those who were non-Rajputs, and the other who were the Rajputs. And the Rajputs paid their allegiance to their clan leader first before they would accept any kind of other relationship with the rulers or with anybody who was their overlord. Now, there has been a lot of debate regarding feudalism in India, but D.D. Kosambi's contribution has been considered as very important because it's made specific certain features in the Indian feudalism which is not to be found elsewhere, particularly in the context of European feudalism when we compare India with the world. Now, regarding the Rajputs and their military achievements, you see, war was treated as a sport, and every time it was seen that often the Dasera festival was celebrated, then the chief would set out on an expedition of conquering the next country. So actually, the Chauhans fought the Paramaras fought the Gaharwals, and this kind of thing went on. And the Rajputs were actually caught up in various struggles among themselves, and sometimes they even allied with the Muslim sultans to fight their Rajput brethren. Now, this kind of relationship was to be found also in every kind of feudal setup, where the peasantry was to be harnessed to this entire structure of expansion in order to extract more and more revenue. In the context of the Rajputs, there was a specific case because they were giving their tribute not only to a ruler but to their clan chief and also to their tribal head. And this created a specific cultural system with which the Rajputs continue for a long time. The most important part about the Rajputs were that they continued to be considered as the warrior caste even after the Muslim sultans had settled down, the Rajput rulers had formed smaller principalities, and even after Babur had come in and had a war with the Rajputs. What we find is that these smaller kingdoms then became centers of what was known as a kind of Rajput culture. And they carried on this feudal burden of chivalry, honor, and resistance, not only against the Muslim sultans, but against each other. And after the 15th century, we see that Rajput solidarity had completely collapsed. The two major rulers who had played very important part in bringing these together, bringing the Rajputs together, one was Rana Kumbho, both by his conquest and by his policy of patronage and developing a kind of Rajput ethics, and Rana Sanga, who unfortunately later invited Babur because he thought that Babur would be able to throw off the Delhi Sultans, the Lodhis. Now, the question that rises is that during these first phase, when the Rajputs were fighting against the Muslim sultans and the invaders, there was not a single ethic that was at play. What there was military technology. There was a swift cavalry that was being used by the Muslim sultans. It is said that the Rajputs also knew the use of the stirrup and the horses, but somehow their cavalry did not move as fast. The second was the question of the weapons. There was bow and arrow, but at the same time there were probably introduction of firearms, which actually became very clear from the period of Babur, but artillery was probably being used by the sultans for a long time. Now, this whole thing of war, technology, and a particular culture is also tied up with a different kind of a religious and literary movement that was growing in this period, in this entire region. First, we have the mix of kind of Indo-Persian, Indo-Islamic and Sufistic learning in writings like people like Malik Muhammad Jaisi, who wrote his Padmavat actually in Hindi. The other is a kind of belief in the Bhakti literature. During this period, the Sufis and the Bhaktis people came together, and they believed in one God, and they believed in one religious cult. Those who were believed in Ram or Krishna also believed in the cult heads, even if they did not believe in one God. They believed in the leader of the cult, and the relationship with God was that to be the lover and the beloved. Now, this entire influence was also to be felt in Rajasthan. And here we have, on one hand, the stories of Kumbho, being the victor, the conqueror, the ruler, the administrator. On the other, we have the stories of Mirabai and her bhajans, which actually held the people together. The temples which were being built during this time, from the period of the Chandelos of Khajuraho, a particular type of sculpture and architecture had become popular in Rajasthan, which developed round the growth of the temples. And this was carried on right till the end of the 15th century, when we have Rana Kumbho building his victory tower. The whole story of Rajasthan is therefore not only that of a group of people who were warriors, who were fighting the Muslims and resisting them. We have an entire story of literature, culture, religious faith, temple building, and again, a social structure which depended very much on its own brand of feudalism. This was also probably the reason why, after a period, the Rajputs could no longer sustain their power, because they could not come together, they could not be under one solidarity, and unfortunately, the Mughals brought in the centralizing forces which worked right into and walked right into the Rajput social structure and helped to make it their own.